Tudo isso que eu consegui foi através de dedicação, perseverança, e muito desejo de atingir os meus objetivos, muito desejo de vitória, vitória na vida, não vitória como piloto.
Most people wait for proof before they change how they live. They wait for the contract before they act like professionals. They wait for the title before they train like champions. They wait for the result before they adopt the identity that produces it. But there is a specific kind of person, rare, almost unsettling to watch, who operates from a completely different logic. Who doesn't wait. Who builds the internal architecture of a winner long before the external world has any reason to recognize them as one. The question isn't whether this kind of person exists. The question is what they actually do, every single day, that separates them from everyone waiting for permission to begin. His name was Ayrton Senna. In 1981, Ayrton Senna arrived in British Formula Ford with almost nothing the sport recognized as significant. He was 21 years old, unknown outside Brazil, driving for a mid-level team with no factory backing and no guarantee that any of it would lead anywhere. What he did have was a relationship with preparation that most drivers at his level had never seen up close. Before a single competitive lap, Senna was already treating every session, practice, qualifying, testing, with an intensity that confused the people around him. He wasn't warming into the weekend. He was already at the edge from the first moment the car moved. Teammates and engineers noted early that Senna didn't have a version of himself reserved for important moments. Every moment was important. Every lap was the lap. He won the Formula Ford 1600 British Championship in his debut season, then the Formula Ford 2000 title the following year, then Formula 3 in 1983, dominating a field that included future Formula One competitors, winning 15 races in a single season with a consistency that wasn't human noise, but documented pattern. He wasn't moving up through the categories because luck kept finding him. He was moving up because the standard he held himself to in private never lowered to match the level he was currently competing at. He always trained for the level above. But by the time Senna reached Formula One in 1984, he had never held a world championship title. But the internal architecture, the daily discipline, the refusal to distinguish between a practice lap and a race lap, was already fully formed. Senna didn't build his discipline after he won. He built it so that winning would eventually have no choice but to follow. There is a version of you that only shows up when the stakes feel high enough. When the meeting matters. When someone is watching. When the result is on the line. The rest of the time, the ordinary Tuesday, the session no one will remember, the work that produces no immediate feedback, that version stays quiet. You tell yourself it's reasonable, that you're conserving energy. That intensity should be reserved for what counts. But here's what that logic costs you. Every time you lower your standard to match the perceived importance of the moment, you are training yourself to be someone who needs external pressure to perform. You are building a version of yourself that only functions when the environment forces it to. And that version, however impressive it looks under pressure, is fragile. Because the moment the pressure disappears, so does the performance. The people who consistently operate at the highest level don't perform well when it matters. They perform well because they never stopped performing. The standard never moved. The context changed. The discipline didn't. This is what discipline actually means. Not in the motivational sense, but in the structural sense. Discipline is not the ability to push harder when things get difficult. It is the decision to hold the same standard when there is no reason to, when no one is watching, when the result doesn't count, when the moment feels ordinary. It is a system of behavior maintained independently of motivation, circumstance, or audience. And its power comes precisely from its consistency. A standard that only applies sometimes is not a standard. It is a mood. The reason discipline at this level produces results that motivation never can is neurological before it is philosophical. Every time you maintain your standard in a low-stakes moment, you are reinforcing a neural pathway that makes that standard feel like identity, not effort. Neuroscience calls this automaticity, the process by which repeated behavior moves from conscious decision to unconscious default. What begins as a choice, to take this lap seriously, to prepare as if this session matters, eventually stops requiring a choice at all. It becomes who you are. The inverse is equally true. Every time you allow the standard to drop because the moment doesn't feel important, you are reinforcing a different pathway, one that connects your performance to external permission. You are teaching your nervous system that high performance is conditional, and conditional systems break under conditions they weren't designed for. Discipline, applied consistently in ordinary moments, removes the condition. It makes excellence the default state, not the exception. Senna's engineers and teammates throughout his Formula One career documented something that puzzled many who observed it. He debriefed after practice sessions with the same forensic attention he gave to races. Lap times that would never appear in any official record received the same analysis as laps that determined championship points. He wasn't doing this because he didn't understand what mattered. He was doing it because he had decided that his standard of attention was not determined by what the session was worth on paper. In 1988 alone, Senna took pole position in 13 out of 16 races. That number is not the product of talent appearing when needed. It is the product of a standard that never needed the moment to be important before it showed up fully. In 1987, Senna was driving for Lotus, a team that had fallen significantly from its former status. The car was not competitive with the leading machinery. There were races where the result was effectively decided before the lights went out. There is documented testimony from team personnel from that period describing Senna pushing the Lotus to its absolute mechanical limit in races where points were already out of reach. Not for the cameras, not for the headlines, but with the same concentration he brought to pole position laps at Monaco. More than once, his engineers questioned the physical toll, the logic of protecting the car, managing the race, conserving what couldn't be won. Senna's position was consistent and, to some, difficult to understand. He was not there to manage. He was there to drive at the limit of what was possible with what he had. There were moments in that period, documented in team communications, where his results didn't reflect the effort because the machinery simply wouldn't allow it. The external evidence was absent. The discipline remained. He didn't return to the principle because the season got better. He returned because he had never left it. The car limited the result. Nothing limited the standard. But this wasn't limited to one moment in Senna's life. The same principle showed up again, in a completely different context, and the pattern it reveals is impossible to ignore. If you look at Senna's career through the lens of results alone, you will find a world champion 3 times over: 1988, 1990, 1991. You will find 65 pole positions, 41 race victories, a statistical footprint that remains among the most concentrated in the history of the sport. But if you look at where Senna's discipline became most visible, most exposed, it was not in the dry races under optimal conditions, where every driver on the grid was operating at the ceiling of their machinery. It was in the rain. Wet conditions in Formula One are the great equalizer and the great revealer simultaneously. They reduce the role of the car. They amplify the role of the driver's judgment, nerve, and, most critically, the consistency of their preparation. A driver who has trained their attention to drop in low-stakes moments will find, in rain, that their attention drops at the moment the stakes become highest. The habit is already built. Senna's wet weather performances are among the most documented anomalies in the sport's history. His 1984 Monaco Grand Prix, in only his second season of Formula One, driving for the uncompetitive Toleman team, saw him close a gap of nearly 30 seconds on the race leader, Alain Prost, before the race was controversially stopped. Observers and analysts noted not only the pace but the quality of attention visible in every corner. Nothing wasted, nothing approximate, every input deliberate. This was not a driver who had discovered a new gear under pressure. This was a driver whose gear had never changed. What the rain did was remove the variables that allowed other drivers to partially compensate for inconsistent preparation. When the conditions demanded total attention, Senna's total attention was already there, because it was always there. He spoke, in documented interviews, about his relationship to difficult conditions as something close to clarifying rather than threatening. Where other drivers experienced rain as an interruption to normal performance, Senna experienced it as a return to the most honest version of the task. You, the car, the track, and no margin for anything less than complete presence. That framing, difficulty as clarification rather than obstacle, is only available to someone whose discipline was never conditional on conditions being favorable. Connect the two moments. The young driver in British Formula Ford treating every practice lap as a race lap, and the Formula One driver turning rain into his most defining environment. The context changed completely. One is a junior category with nothing yet proven. The other is the highest level of the sport under its most demanding conditions. The discipline is identical. That is not coincidence. That is character, built through repetition across years of ordinary moments that no one was watching. What it reveals about Senna is not that he was gifted with something others lacked. It is that he refused to allow the ordinariness of a moment to determine the quality of his attention. And when the moment stopped being ordinary, when the conditions demanded everything, he was the only one who had never stopped giving it. Now that you understand what this principle is, how Senna lived it, and why it showed up in every chapter of his life, the real question is what you do with it starting today. Identify one recurring task in your life that you currently treat as low stakes. A meeting you underprepare for, a session you approach with less than full attention, a habit you maintain loosely because today doesn't feel important. For the next 7 days, bring to that single task the exact standard you would bring if the outcome determined something significant. Don't change the task. Change the quality of attention you give it. Notice what that repetition builds in you by day 7. Remove the condition from your discipline. Write down the standard you hold for yourself, the level of effort, preparation, or focus you consider your real standard. Then write down the conditions under which you allow that standard to drop. That list is your actual operating system. Wherever you find a condition, when I'm tired, when no one's watching, when it doesn't count, that is precisely where your discipline needs to become unconditional. Pick one condition this week. Eliminate it. Build a debrief practice for ordinary sessions, not just the important ones, the ones that don't count. After a practice run, a work session, a preparation block that produced no visible result, spend 5 minutes asking, was my standard consistent from the first minute to the last? Where did my attention drop? What would I do differently if this session had been the one that mattered? This is how Senna turned invisible laps into championship infrastructure. The debrief makes the ordinary session part of a system, not just time that passed. If you want to go deeper into everything we covered today, one book changed the way I understand performance completely. Ayrton Senna, The Official Inside Story by Richard Williams. I'll leave the link in the description. The title you're waiting for will not teach you the discipline. The discipline is what makes you someone the title eventually finds. Senna didn't become a champion and then start living like one. He lived like one until the sport had no choice but to confirm what he already knew. The only question worth sitting with is this: what standard are you already holding? And what would change if you refused to lower it? Starting with today's most ordinary moment. If this is the kind of content that makes you think differently, subscribe and hit the like button. It's the simplest way to help this channel grow and reach people who need to hear this. What's the one area of your life where you only perform at your real standard when the stakes feel high enough? And what would it cost you to hold that standard every single day? Let me know in the comments. See you in the next one.